Daniel Dillon, Ashes in the Wind. Written by Tane Blackadder. Read by Arthur Howard. The silence in our booth at Mel's Griddle had a different texture without Sarah. It wasn't the old heavy silence of before her, but a new one. An absence that felt like a missing instrument in a familiar piece of music. Daniel was quieter. His gaze turned more inward. The small settled ease he carried with her now a palpable vacancy. I was deep in the digital catacombs of our accounts, the click of my keys the only sound, when the door jingled and a man walked in, bringing the outside with him in a way that was more than just the chill autumn air. He carried the scent of smoke, not the clean, woody smell of a fireplace, but the acrid, chemical-laden reek of a structural fire, a cloying perfume of burnt plastic, charred timber, and something uniquely, unpleasantly organic. It clung to his clothes, his hair, his skin, a ghostly shroud that seemed to permeate the very air around him. He was gaunt, hollowed out, with the haunted eyes of a man who has stared into one furnace too many. A firefighter's badge was pinned crookedly to the jacket of his uniform, but he was on medical leave. The tension in his shoulders and the slight tremor in his right hand screamed it. His name was Jared Kline, and as he slid into our booth, he lit a cigarette with a practiced, shaking hand, the first of many he would smoke in our presence. "They called it an accident," he said, his voice a gravelly rasp that sounded scraped raw from heat and inhaled toxins, a permanent injury from the very event he was describing. He said the words with a bitter, practiced cadence, as if he'd been forced to recite this official lie until it had lost all meaning, leaving only the acid of betrayal behind. An electrical fault, hidden in the walls of the old textile factory on Harris. Fast, unpredictable, a tragedy. He recited the phrases like a grim liturgy, each word a polished stone placed on the graves of his friends. Then he took a long, desperate drag from his cigarette, the ember flaring at the end like a tiny angry star, a miniature of the hell he was describing. He held the smoke in his lungs for a beat too long, as if trying to replace the phantom smoke of that night with something he could control, before exhaling a plume that coiled in the diner's stale air, adding a new bitter layer to the scent of old coffee and grease. He looked at us then, his eyes, bloodshot and set deep in their sockets, burning with an intensity that was both feverish and utterly lucid. The bureaucratic veneer of the official story fell away, shattered by the sheer force of his conviction. It was a lie. The final word was not spoken so much as expelled, a blunt, ugly truth that landed on the formica table between us with the weight of a fallen beam. It was a simple statement, but it carried the echoes of collapsing concrete, the roar of an unnatural fire, and the silent screaming disbelief of a man who had seen the truth with his own eyes and was told not to believe them. He told us about the fire, the one that had killed 3 of his crew, his brothers. Engine Company 17. He described the heat, a living, breathing beast, the way the sound of the flames was a roar that swallowed screams. He talked about the flashover, the sudden superheated ignition of everything in the room, a hellish phenomenon that shouldn't have happened so quickly, not with their positioning, not with their strategy. "I got lucky," he muttered, staring at the glowing tip of his cigarette. "A beam fell, pinned my leg, they dragged me out, the others. Martinez, Chen, O'Malley, they were deeper in. They never had a chance." He finally looked at Daniel, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "The official report is a clean, whitewashed tombstone, but I was there, I know fire. The way it moved, the color of the smoke, the points of origin, it wasn't right, it was set, someone set that fire." Daniel didn't speak for a long moment. He just watched Jared, reading the man's anguish, his conviction, the way his body seemed to vibrate with the need for someone, anyone, to believe him. "Why would the department bury it?" Daniel finally asked, his voice low. "Politics," Jared spat, the word tasting like ash. "A multi-million-dollar development deal for that whole district hinges on stability. A tragic accident is a sad story. A firebug, maybe one of our own. That's a scandal that shuts down entire city projects. They'd rather let 3 good men be martyrs to negligence than risk the truth. They told me I was suffering from PTSD, that my memory was unreliable. He crushed the cigarette in the diner's ashtray with a violent twist. My memory is the only reliable thing I have left. Daniel gave that single, sharp nod I knew so well. The pact was made. He was taking the case. For a man who had been failed by the system, meant to protect him, for the ghosts of men left behind in the smoke. The investigation began in our two parallel worlds, a familiar division of labor that felt more pronounced, more starkly contrasted in Sarah's absence. Daniel descended into the physical, gritty world of Engine Company 17 and the city's labyrinthine fire investigation unit. This was a realm of handshake deals, unspoken loyalties, and the unique, clannish language of men who faced death together. He moved through the cavernous, echoing firehouses that smelled of diesel, disinfectant, and old sweat, and the dim, beer-soaked union halls where grievances were nursed in low voices. His presence was a dark, quiet pressure, a stone dropped into the still waters of a closed community. He sought out the other survivors, the men whose hands had dragged Jared's broken body from the inferno, their eyes shadowed by a guilt they couldn't name. He tracked down the disgruntled, passed-over investigators who might have been leaned on, whose professional conclusions had been deemed politically inconvenient. Daniel didn't accuse. He simply stood there, a living question mark, his silence and his unwavering gaze doing the work of 1,000 interrogations. He asked questions in that low, gravelly rumble that made men shift their weight, stare at their boots, or find a sudden, intense interest in the middle distance, anywhere but meet the haunted certainty in his own eyes. He was prying open a wound that had been hastily stitched shut by authority, and the pus of buried secrets was beginning to seep out. Meanwhile, I retreated into my own element, the cool, silent, and logical sanctuary of data. My world was not one of haunted glances and pressured silences, but of spreadsheets, public records requests, and digital archives. While Daniel navigated the emotional minefield of the firehouse, I navigated the sterile catacombs of municipal servers. I pulled the official incident report, line by line, cross-referencing every timestamp and observation with the factory's original blueprints and the insurance assessor's cold financial autopsy. I built a digital model of the event, not of flame and smoke, but of decisions and dollars, searching for the fracture points in the official narrative, the tiny, telltale cracks in the foundation of the lie they had built. We were two miners, working different ends of the same dark tunnel, one with his hands feeling his way through the emotional rock, the other with a laser, measuring the precise, cold geometry of the deceit. It was Daniel who brought back the first crack in the official story. He'd found a retired fire investigator, a man named O'Malley, no relation to the fallen firefighter, who had been quietly forced into early retirement for asking too many questions. He confirmed it, Daniel told me that night back at Mel's, the smell of smoke still faintly clinging to his coat from his time with Jared. The fire pattern showed at least two separate points of origin, clear pore patterns on the concrete, an accelerant. It was arson. The higher-ups knew. They buried his initial findings. "So we're looking for an arsonist," I said, the word feeling foreign and dangerous in the cozy diner. "We're looking for a firefighter," Daniel corrected, his voice grim. "Someone who knew how to make it look like an accident, someone who knew their tactics, their response times, someone who knew exactly where to put the fire to cause maximum chaos." The list of suspects was, by its nature, short and horrifying. It had to be someone from within the Brotherhood. The tragedy narrowed the field further. We were looking at the survivors of Engine 17. Daniel's focus turned to them. There was Captain Riggs, the stoic, grieving leader who carried the weight of every lost man. There was Proby Evans, the young, idealistic rookie who had been on the truck that night and was now wrestling with survivors' guilt. And there was Leo Walsh, a veteran firefighter with 20 years on the job, who had been Martinez's partner. It was Walsh that Daniel's instincts kept circling. He was a man who had been passed over for promotion multiple times, a man known for his bitterness, his sharp tongue. He had been close to Martinez, but their friendship had reportedly been strained lately. Daniel dug deeper, using contacts in the department's human resources and the local bars firefighters frequented. The break came from an unexpected place. I was sifting through the personnel files Daniel had discreetly obtained when a pattern emerged, not in the words, but in the numbers. Walsh had taken a significant unexplained pay cut 6 months before the fire. It was listed as a voluntary shift reduction for personal reasons. But when I cross-referenced it with city records, I found it. Walsh had a side business, a small contracting outfit, and his sole client, the one that had abruptly terminated his contract 6 months ago, was the very development company set to profit from the Harris District project. They had replaced him with a larger, more corporate firm. Martinez's brother-in-law, in fact. I showed Daniel the connection. Walsh lost his side hustle. He was bitter. He saw Martinez's family benefiting from the company that cut him loose. Daniel's eyes darkened with understanding. It's not just jealousy. It's betrayal. He felt replaced, personally and professionally. We arranged to meet Jared at a secluded spot by the river, away from the ears of the firehouse. The wind whipped off the water, cold and clean, doing little to dispel the scent of smoke that seemed baked into Jared's very being. Daniel laid out our findings. "Walsh?" Jared's face was a mask of disbelief that quickly curdled into a sickened rage. "Leo. He was there. He helped drag me out. He lit another cigarette, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the lighter. Why? For a damn contract?" "For respect," Daniel said, his voice low and hard. "For the feeling that he still mattered, that he couldn't be so easily cast aside. He set a fire he knew his brothers would run into, a fire that would, in his twisted logic, prove he was still a force to be reckoned with, while getting revenge on the man he felt had stolen from him. The plan was desperate. We had circumstantial evidence, motive and opportunity, but no proof. Daniel decided to confront Walsh directly, at his home away from the solidarity of the firehouse. We went that night, the three of us, Daniel, myself and Jared, who refused to be left behind. Walsh lived in a modest, well-kept house on the outskirts of the city. The garage door was open, revealing a spotless workshop. He was there polishing a vintage axe, his movements slow and precise. He looked up as we approached, his eyes narrowing when he saw Jared. "Jared? What's this?" he asked, his voice wary. "They know, Leo," Jared said, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. Daniel stepped forward. "We know about your contract with Harris Development. We know they dropped you. We know you blamed Martinez." Walsh's face went through a rapid series of transformations, shock, denial, and finally, a chilling, resigned calm. He set the axe down carefully. "You have no proof." "We have the truth," Daniel said. "We have the paw patterns. We have O'Malley's report." For a long moment, Walsh just stared at us, the silence broken only by the distant sound of a siren. Then a strange, broken smile touched his lips. "Proof," he whispered. "You want to know about proof?" He walked to a locked metal cabinet in the back of the garage. With a key from his chain, he opened it. Inside, on a small shelf, were 3 items arranged with a bizarre reverence: a charred and melted helmet flashlight, a section of scorched turnout coat with the name Chen still visible, and a firefighter's glove blackened and stiff. Trophies. "They were going to replace us all," Walsh said, his voice eerily flat. "Out with the old, in with the new. Martinez was already talking about taking a job with the developers. My crew, my brothers, they were just going to walk away. I couldn't let them. I had to show them. I had to show everyone what real fire is, what we're made of." The confession hung in the air, more devastating than any accusation. It wasn't a grand scheme of profit, but a small, pathetic story of a man who couldn't bear being left behind, who would rather burn his world to the ground than watch it change without him. Jared let out a sound that was half sob, half roar, and launched himself at Walsh. Daniel moved faster, catching him, holding him back as Jared struggled, tears of pure rage and loss streaming down his face. "They were my brothers," Jared screamed at Walsh, who just stood there empty. A man who had already been consumed by his own internal fire. We called it in, anonymously. The police found Walsh in his garage, sitting beside his cabinet of horrors, waiting for them. The fallout was swift and ugly, just as the department had feared. But the truth was out. A few days later, Jared met us one last time at Mel's. The scent of smoke was still there, a permanent resident in his lungs, but some of the frantic energy had left him. The ghosts had been given a name. "It doesn't bring them back," he said, staring into his coffee. "It doesn't make the smell go away." "No," Daniel agreed, his voice quiet. "It doesn't." "But at least they don't have a liar's epitaph," Jared said, and for the first time there was a flicker of something like peace in his haunted eyes. He stood, shook our hands with a firm, calloused grip, and walked out of the diner, a solitary figure carrying his ghosts, but no longer carrying the burden of a lie. Back in the booth, the silence returned. Sarah's absence felt profound. Daniel stared out the window at the passing traffic, his profile etched with a fresh layer of weariness. "The worst fires," he said, so softly I almost didn't hear him, "aren't the ones that burn down buildings." He turned his coffee cup slowly on the formica. "It's the ones people carry inside, the ones that smolder until there's nothing left to burn but the people around them." I had no numbers for that, no column in a ledger where that kind of loss could be balanced. It was just ashes. Ashes in the wind. The phone rang, shrill and insistent. Daniel didn't move for a moment, then he reached for it, his movements heavy with the weight of the truth we'd just uncovered. "Dylan," he answered, his voice a low rumble. "Another case, another soul on fire. And I, Michael Nollid, would be right there, my spreadsheets open, trying to find logic in the inferno.